Ben Ali was deposed last month. Former Foreign Minister AlJazeera al-Sebsi has been appointed in his place. A human rights group says 2 Iranian opposition leaders have been abducted by security forces and are in grave danger. Mehdi Karoubi and Mir Hussein Mousavi have been under unofficial house arrest since the start of the month. The government blames them for inciting pro-reform protests. Former President Mohammad Khatami had been calling for their release. US astronauts at the International Space Station are preparing for the first spacewalk of their mission. They plan to make repairs to the exterior of the orbiting lab. The crew arrived aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery on Saturday. This is the last flight for Discovery. The shuttle is being retired after 39 missions over 26 years. The 83rd Annual Academy Awards ceremony is set to begin in just a couple of hours from now. The King's Speech star Colin Firth arrived on the red carpet just moments ago. His film is up for 12 nominations, including Best Picture. And those are the
January 2011. History unfolding.
And now things are getting worse by the moment.
This film tells the story of 5 days when the people of Egypt broke through a barrier of fear they had known for a generation and rose in revolt against their president.
Police are knocking on our door. The police is on their way up to our office. I will stay on the air if I can until the police come. We're going to keep these images for you guys live until we are actually forced off the air, either by the police or if our signal is somehow interrupted.
Small networks of activists were gearing up for mass action. They'd been agitating against President Mubarak's autocratic rule for years. But they never had attracted mass support until another Arab country rose up against its tyrant.
The protests haven't kicked off just yet. They're expected to start in the coming couple of hours. This is going to be a real test whether online activism in Egypt can translate into real action. Anger has been on the rise in Egypt for the past couple of years, but we have seen similar calls fizzle out. The main difference now is that these calls are coming after what happened in Tunisia, which seems to have not only inspired activists, but actually ordinary Egyptians, a dozen of whom we have seen set themselves on fire in copycat self-immolations similar to the one that had sparked the uprising in Tunisia.
Their demands simple: political freedoms, an end to state corruption, and a better quality of life for the impoverished population.
Anger had been brewing in Egypt for years now. The last 2 years, we witnessed several strikes in the country, rising unemployment, sectarian tension was on the rise.
Well, I think anyone who's lived or spent time in Egypt would tell you there were plenty of signs that suggested that people in Egypt were growing increasingly frustrated. But I don't think anyone could have genuinely predicted that thousands of Egyptians would defy and challenge the government and its various security apparatuses.
President Mubarak and his National Democratic Party are apparently as secure in power as ever on the eve of the planned demonstrations.
What happened that day was that tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands of Egyptians, different parts of the country took to the streets. Not stationary protests as we were used to seeing here in Egypt. They were actually marching from one neighborhood to another in the heart of Cairo.
Are we expecting to see trouble?
It's difficult to judge at this early stage.
They started marching onto different parts of the capital, the strategic buildings perhaps that symbolized their plight or their agony, the ruling National Party headquarters, the state television, the foreign ministry.
The ruling party is the symbol of that authority. as protesters are concerned and activists are concerned, which is why they're trying to stage this protest now in front of the ruling party.
Just listen to the chants roaring in downtown Cairo, the hundreds of people walking to the streets. It's unprecedented for people to march to the streets this way as an act of protest without security trying to prevent them. The people we've seen taken to the streets today are not the 50, 60 activists that we've been seeing protesting in Egypt for the past 5, 6 years. These were normal Egyptians.
Thousands marched peacefully in the morning. Their ultimate goal, to reach the city's heart, Tahrir Square. But then scuffles break out with riot police. They attempt to divide and conquer.
Indeed, Darren, this news just coming in. In fact, I'm just getting a chance to read the statement that's been issued now by the Interior Ministry. The first official reaction since the morning, blaming the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood group.
The government, quick to seize the political capital, accused their longtime enemy of inciting unrest.
The numbers estimates were around 20,000, but I cannot be that sure. We outnumbered them, which is a very new thing, a new experience to us. When we approached Tahrir Square, police tried to stop us, but our numbers just marched through them and they chanted peaceful, peaceful till they passed through all the police barriers. Definitely not the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood announced that they will not be part of this.
We're tired. Stop inflation. We're suffering. We love Egypt and we defend Egypt, but we've had enough.
Voices roaring into the night. Egyptian men, women and children called for the resignation of the president.
They shot at us. They shot at us. Why? I don't know. Who are we? The enemy? Am I an enemy of the state? I came here to ask just for rights. I came here to ask for a home.
Shortly after midnight, that's when it became clear to everybody that the police, their patience was wearing thin.
A new dawn in Cairo, and a policing strategy in Egypt on a whole new scale.
After a day of mass protests in Egypt, the government has banned any further demonstrations. And there's a warning to activists of a tough crackdown if people do take to the streets again.
Let it go! Let it go!
I'm very close to the press syndicate. The scene itself was really calm, but right next to it is the Supreme Court, and there were a group of less than 1,000 protesters completely encircled by police. They beat them with the sticks and they shot tear gas bombs, and the whole demonstration was separated and they were running after protesters.
So, Mona, are the police responding to violent protests from the crowd, or what are they doing?
They're at a loss how to respond, so they are responding in the only way they know right now, which is beating up and completely turning violent and aggressive.
Reports flood in of detentions and violence, changing the mood to one of defiance. Our reporters witness the use of excessive force.
I actually have to move. I have to move. Protesters are pelting a riot squad truck with stones.
An official 6 p.m. curfew is ignored, and by evening, the mission to reach Tahrir Square brings together at least 2,000 people.
That square has been cordoned off today by the security forces. They're not allowing people to get anywhere near it. It is the symbolic heart of Cairo, and the word Tahrir means liberation.
Sure enough, by night, our cameras capture the scene in Tahrir. Protesters have broken through police lines.
The protesters have lost their fear. They are determined to continue doing this. It doesn't show any signs of stopping.
News that several hundred Bedouin in the Sinai exchange gunfire with police proves this struggle no longer belongs to urbanite Egyptians. Amateur footage shows a 22-year-old there apparently killed by a single gunshot to the head. Mohammed El-Baradei, former top nuclear diplomat, returns to lead the crowds.
You know, I will be with them. They are my people, and I have to be there. And I'd like to see Egypt, a new Egypt. You know. Political support, moral support.
Up until this point, the protest movement has not had any specific leader to try and galvanise it and give it some kind of direction. Mohammed El-Baradei's arrival is going to be highly anticipated and is certainly something that President Mubarak will not be very happy to see him arrive.
But on the coattails of a grassroots uprising, he no longer represents everyone out on the streets.
It seems that confrontations have fizzled.
With blood now on Egypt's streets, filming becomes difficult. Attempts to block media coverage, which intensifies in days to come, as AlJazeera and other journalists become the state's new scapegoats.
سيدتي وسادتي، نظرا لما شهدته بعض المحافظات من أعمال الشغب والخروج على القانون.
Overnight, Egypt has been unplugged. Shortly after midnight, internet and mobile networks had been shut off in the hope of paralysing the protests.
The US-based internet monitoring site says it's an unprecedented event in history. The Egyptian government has effectively wiped their country from the global map.
And that's when alarm bells started to go off, because as soon as we realized that the internet had gone down, we knew that the government was in a very desperate mode. It was in a serious mode, and it was about to confront perhaps one of the most biggest challenges.
Across the country, people had already agreed on more protests after prayers, calling for a day of rage.
We've heard reports from eyewitnesses that undercover informants from the government have infiltrated all the mosques, particularly those known to have a large Muslim Brotherhood gathering.
And it seems to be a desperate action by the government. That seems to be the feeling on the streets as well. Why is the government resorting to such desperate measures? Because if anything is going to push these people over the edge.
By early afternoon, our correspondents in Cairo, Alexandria and Suez were witnessing deliberate violence.
We went to the mosque in Giza. I noticed that the police posture was very, very aggressive, and almost instantly they started firing water cannons. As soon as that didn't work, they quickly began to fire tear gas. This scene was unbelievable. I mean, we had essentially become besieged in the mosque.
We are breaking into programming here on Al Jazeera, 11:45 GMT, about 1:45 in the afternoon in Cairo, Egypt. Live continuing coverage here on Al Jazeera of a day of mass protests. They called it a day of rage. It is fast turning into that.
There were roughly 50,000 protesters as they walked through the streets of central Suez towards Al-Arba'in police station. The riot police sent 3 fire engines. The first 2 smashed through the crowd. They ran over several people in front of my eyes. That disproportionate force seemed to me like the trigger that made swathe after swathe of protesters literally throw themselves at the thousands of state security personnel and riot police who had gathered.
Medical workers in Suez count as many as 55 civilians and 15 policemen injured. Anger Friday told Mubarak and the watching world that actual regime change was the end goal, not simply the right to protest. It also announced the failure of the communications lockdown, as utter defiance and confrontation spread far from the capital. In Alexandria, 10 separate demonstrations with protesters chanting illegitimate. 100 took to the streets of the industrial town of Mahalla. Around 40,000 in Mansoura attempt to destroy ruling party offices. Thousands amassed in Damietta. And also in Port Said. Around 600 clashed with police in Ismailia, birthplace of the opposition group Muslim Brotherhood. In Suez, protesters took over the central square. And even touristic Luxor, far away in the south, saw a 15,000-strong march dispersed by tear gas.
That looks like a